Welcome to Family Revenge Secrets, where we tell true-to-heart family dramas about love, loss, and the courage it takes to face what no one wants to say out loud. If stories like these help you feel less alone, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter. They say a funeral is a room that learns to whisper. People arrive with hands pressed together, bring casseroles that taste like apologies, and speak in the kind of hush that makes the air feel like cotton. I stood in that hush, 50 years old and newly widowed, watching a framed photograph of my husband glow in the afternoon light as if it belonged to someone else's life. His name was Thomas. In the picture, he was holding a fishing pole and smiling a summer smile, one he hadn't used much near the end. The pastor said words about endurance and faith. I nodded when people hugged me, thanked them for the flowers, and tried not to look at our children too long, because the love on their faces pulled tears from places I could not afford to open. Grief can be a stubborn thing. It takes up the space where answers should live. The room held lilies and black suits and the soft clicking gossip of people who meant well and people who didn't. I recognized most of them, neighbors, employees from the hardware store Thomas ran, a few faces from church. And then there were others who watched too carefully, as if my husband's death had given shape to something they'd only suspected in shadow. A woman hovered by the guest book longer than necessary. She wore a gray dress and an expression that kept revising itself. Sorrow, calculation, sorrow again. A man in a navy blazer whispered to her and glanced, not at my husband's picture, but at the door that leads to the back corridor of the church. A narrow hallway with a broom closet and a window that fogs over in winter. Their lips moved like people sharing secrets in a library. I told myself not to notice. Not today. My daughter Emily touched my elbow. She is 23 in earnest, a school teacher who collects classroom pencils like stray cats. "Mom," she said, "you should sit." Her eyes were swollen from crying. My son Mark stood behind her, 18 and restless, jaw set in the way boys set their jaw when they want to be men. He kept adjusting his tie like it was a punishment. "I'm fine," I lied, because women say, "I'm fine," the way firefighters say it's contained. You want to believe it, you don't ask how hot the room is. We lined up for the receiving line. People took turns stepping into our little circle of sorrow, telling me about Thomas, what a good boss he was, how he once paid an overdue bill, how he showed up early to set up folding chairs for the town potluck. They offered stories like coins in a collection plate. I hoarded them all, but the whispers kept pricking the edges of the day. "Did you know?" I heard one woman begin before someone elbowed her. Another guest asked where Thomas kept his old attic key, a question so odd it knocked lightly against my ribs. He laughed when I stared. "He always joked about that locked room of his," the man said. "Must be where he kept his baseball cards." He winked, and the wink landed like a fly in my water glass. When it was time to close the casket, I touched the wood as if it might touch me back. My husband looked smaller in death, the way a storm looks small once it has passed. We rode in the limousine behind him, the hearse ahead like a period at the end of a sentence I wasn't done reading. At the cemetery, the sky held itself together. Dirt makes a sound when it hits pine that you never forget. Back at the house, casseroles multiplied on our kitchen counter like a math problem. Someone set a pitcher of sweet tea beside a vase of roses that had opened too soon. The living room filled again with that odd mix, love and rumor, tenderness with a curl of something else. I heard the coffee maker hiss and a neighbor ask my sister-in-law if I planned to go through Thomas's things right away. The way people talk after a funeral, you'd think grief came with a to-do list. After sunset, the crowd thinned. Emily stacked paper plates. Mark escaped to the porch with a basketball he dribbled without shooting. I loaded the dishwasher and turned off lights and tried to make the house as quiet as the ache in my chest. It was then, standing at the sink with the last of the daylight slipping off the counter like a silk ribbon, that I noticed the fine dust drifting down from the ceiling vent, more than usual, a small gray sigh. The attic. We have lived in this gabled house for 24 years. We raised 2 children and 3 dogs here, painted the dining room twice, and replaced shingles after a windstorm threw a fit. And yet there has always been one door I did not open. The attic door at the end of the upstairs hallway, painted the same white as the trim, fitted with an old brass lock. When we first moved in, Thomas said the hinges were warped, the floorboards up there precarious, the insulation a mess. He'd patch it up someday. Then the store got busier, the kids grew, and someday moved the way some days do, farther out like a boat slipping from shore. He kept the key in his nightstand. At least that's what I thought. Once early on, I asked if I could use the attic for Christmas boxes. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "Let me deal with that headache." Linda, I never asked again. Every marriage has its unspoken hallway. Ours had a door at the end of it. Now, alone with the clink of the dishwasher and the soft thud of the basketball outside, I felt that hallway calling me like an unfinished prayer. I wiped my hands, turned off the kitchen light, and climbed the stairs. Each step creaked the way old bones creak, mine and the house's together. At the top, I paused because grief is also memory, and memory can stop your feet. On the wall hung the photographs of birthdays and first days of school, all those rectangles of proof that life had happened here. In one, Thomas wore a red flannel shirt and held baby Mark under a maple tree that looked like October itself. I pressed 2 fingers to the glass. "Why the locked door, Tom?" I whispered, expecting nothing back and hearing only the air vent hum. The attic door waited like a secret that had gotten old waiting. The brass lock was scratched from years of use, the paint around it scuffed thumb-high. I cupped the knob and felt the house's cool breath come through the seam. If there is a moment that redraws a life, it can be this small: a woman, a keyhole, a darkness behind wood. I checked the nightstand in our bedroom. Top drawer, cuff links, a tin of mints gone to dust, a handkerchief he'd kept for weddings and funerals. Second drawer, warranty booklets, a tape measure, a small wooden box the size of a paperback. My hands trembled like pages in a breeze. The box opened on a hinge, and there it was, old brass winking up at me, a key cut like a jagged smile. Down the hall again, the house listening. My fingers missed the lock twice before the key found its mouth and turned. The mechanism clicked, not loudly, but with the intimacy of a confession. I stood there, heart loud in a quiet stairwell, with the sense, clear as a bell, that whatever waited beyond this door was not just a room. It was a story that had refused to be buried. The door opened with a sigh, as if the house itself had been holding its breath. I stepped into a darkness that smelled of wood left too long in the rain. The attic was a cavern of dust and forgotten air. A single chain dangled from a bare bulb above, and when I tugged it, light spilled weakly over the beams, catching in the particles that danced like ash. Boxes. Dozens of them, stacked and sagging, their corners softened by years of neglect. A trunk pushed against the far wall, its leather peeling, its brass corners dulled. Christmas ornaments I had begged Thomas to let me store here were nowhere in sight. Instead, there were crates with his handwriting scrawled in thick black marker. Receipts 1994, ledgers private. My heart thudded like it had no patience for subtlety. Why had he kept this part of his life apart from ours? Thomas was a man of order, a man who balanced checkbooks to the penny and folded his shirts as if the creases themselves mattered. And yet this attic looked like another man's mind, cluttered, secretive, disarrayed. I moved carefully, every floorboard groaning under me. My fingers trailed over the top of a box, came away gray. The bulb flickered, throwing shadows like ghosts against the rafters. I crouched near the trunk, noticing a fine crack along its lid. It had been opened and closed many times. Inside, beneath yellowed blankets, I found things that felt like strangers. A pair of worn work boots I'd never seen him wear, an army duffel bag, photographs of people I did not know. Men in ball caps, a woman with her arm looped through Thomas's, smiling too widely at some long-ago fairground. I sat back on my heels, confusion rising like water in a well. He had never spoken of these faces. In a box labeled private, my hands trembled as I sifted through envelopes. Old letters, their ink faded but still legible. The handwriting was his, familiar in its firm, upright strokes. Some were addressed to my son. Others bore no name at all, only dates. I lifted one, dated 15 years earlier, and read the first line, "David, I wish I could be there today, but one day you'll understand why I can't." The words blurred as my eyes burned. My son. He was writing to someone who wasn't Mark. Not Emily. Someone else entirely. I wanted to slam the box shut, to turn off the bulb and retreat down the stairs, pretend I had never seen it. But grief and betrayal have a way of keeping you still, pinning you to the floor until you admit the world is not what you thought it was. Beside the letters lay a thin manila folder. I pulled it free, blew off the dust, and opened it. Inside, neatly folded, was a document stamped with the county seal. The paper shook in my grip. Across the top it read, "Last Will and Testament of Thomas Whitaker." I sank onto an old stool, the wood creaking beneath me. My husband had written a will, and not once had he spoken to me about it. We had talked about retirement, about paying off the mortgage, about someday sitting on the porch with grandbabies. But never this. Never the thought of where everything would go when the last light left his eyes. My gaze snagged on a paragraph near the middle. The words bent the air around them. I leave all assets, property, and accounts to my son, David Whitaker, in gratitude for the years we were denied each other. All assets, not divided, not shared, not even a mention of Emily or Mark. Not me, the wife who had carried the weight of his long absences, who had stood in church aisles alone when he claimed to be too busy. Everything, our home, the store, the savings, placed in the hands of a name I had never spoken aloud. The bulb flickered again, threatening to plunge me into dark. My breaths came short, shallow, as if the air had thinned. I folded the will back into its folder, but the words had already seared themselves into me. David. The name pressed against my ribs like a stone. I thought of the woman at the funeral, the one with the gray dress and calculating eyes. The man who had winked about the attic key. They had known something. Perhaps they knew this all along. I stayed on that stool for what felt like an hour, though it could not have been. Around me, the boxes stood as sentries, holding decades of a life that had unfolded parallel to mine. I had shared a bed with Thomas, shared children, shared bills and dinners and arguments over the thermostat, but I had not shared this. This was his hidden world, the one that only death had forced open. Finally, I rose. My knees stiff, my hands unsteady, I gathered the will and one of the letters addressed to my son. I tucked them under my arm like dangerous contraband. Before switching off the light, I looked back once more. Dust swirled in the glow, settling slowly, as if the room exhaled relief at being discovered. When I shut the attic door behind me, the house seemed quieter than before. But inside me, a noise had begun, relentless and low, the kind of sound you cannot silence. I whispered the name into the emptiness of the hallway. David. It echoed like the beginning of a story I never wanted told. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the house heavy with the kind of silence that makes you feel as if someone is listening. The folder lay open before me, the will staring back with its cruel precision. I kept reading the same line, over and over, as if repetition might change its meaning. I leave all assets, property, and accounts to my son, David Whitaker. The name pulsed on the page, foreign and familiar all at once. My husband's penmanship, strong, confident, left no room for doubt. He had written it himself. He had meant every word. I unfolded one of the letters I had carried down from the attic. The envelope was dated 12 years ago. Inside, Thomas's handwriting curved with an intimacy I had not seen in years. "My boy, I'm sorry for missing your birthday again. I keep telling myself one day I'll have the courage to explain everything. Until then, know this, you are my pride. Someday you'll inherit more than just my eyes. Someday, everything I've built will be yours." The letter slipped from my fingers. My pride, my boy. Words I had begged him to say to our son, Mark, during those years when a father's encouragement meant everything. Instead, Thomas had poured them into secret letters for another child, a shadow I had never met. I felt something break inside me, not a scream, not a sob, but a crack, like porcelain under pressure. Memories crowded in. Nights he claimed to be closing late at the store. Weekends he drove out of town, returning with excuses that never fit. I had chalked it up to work, to exhaustion, to the mystery men keep tucked away in their pockets. But no, all along there had been a boy named David. I pressed my hands to my temples, willing the world to make sense. If Thomas had loved this child so much, why hide him? Why keep him tucked away in secret letters, in a will no one was meant to find? Shame, perhaps, or cowardice, or maybe a hope that time would bury truth deeper than the attic floorboards. The clock ticked past 1 a.m., the refrigerator hummed. From upstairs came the soft rhythm of Mark's snore, the occasional turn of Emily in her bed. My children, asleep in a world where their father had belonged only to them. I envied their ignorance. I read another letter, this one shorter, almost frantic. "David, don't listen to what your mother says. I never abandoned you. Circumstances are cruel, but one day when you are grown, I'll prove it. Everything I own will be yours." Circumstances. Such a cowardly word for betrayal. He had been living a double life, and the evidence sat in my trembling hands. I rose from the table and paced the kitchen, my bare feet cold against the tile. The will mocked me from the counter. For years, I had managed bills, pinched pennies, helped keep the store afloat during lean seasons. I had dreamed of a modest retirement, of grandbabies filling our weekends. And now, by his hand, all of it was promised to a stranger. I pulled open the drawer where we kept the family photos, desperate for proof that my life had not been a lie. There was Emily's first recital, Mark's high school basketball game, Christmas mornings with paper scattered like snow. In every picture, Thomas was there, smiling, present. And yet I saw him differently now, as if two faces overlapped. The man who kissed me good night, and the man who whispered promises into envelopes I was never meant to see. I slid down against the cabinets, the photo albums spread around me, and cried into my hands. Not the sharp wail of fresh grief, but the low, guttural sob of betrayal. The kind that comes when the person you trusted most reveals a stranger you never suspected. When the tears subsided, I lifted my head. Across the kitchen, on the counter, the folder remained open, the will exposed. I forced myself to read the final paragraph, words that landed like hammer blows. "In leaving my estate to David, I ask for forgiveness from those I could not be honest with in life. I hope, in death, this truth will heal what I was too weak to mend. Forgiveness." He dared to write that word, to ask for it while denying me the chance to look him in the eye. Forgiveness without confession. Forgiveness without choice. The clock chimed too. I closed the folder and pressed it to my chest. I could not keep this secret from Emily and Mark. They would know. They deserved to know, no matter how it shattered them. Tomorrow, I would tell them about the attic, the letters, the will. I dreaded their faces, Mark's fury, Emily's heartbreak, but I could not let them live in a house built on lies. I stood, knees aching, and gathered the letters back into their envelopes. I tucked them inside the folder, slid the whole thing into the bottom drawer of the buffet cabinet. But hiding it did not quiet the storm. The truth had been spoken into my house, and it would echo until I let it out. Before heading upstairs, I turned back once more to the dark kitchen. The refrigerator's hum seemed louder, the silence between its cycles unbearable. I whispered his name, not with love but with disbelief. Thomas. For the first time since the funeral, I felt anger eclipse grief. I had lost a husband, yes. But tonight, I realized I had also lost the man I thought I knew. And somewhere out there, living in the shadows of our lives, was David. The boy who, by law and by blood, now owned everything we had. Morning arrived with a kind of cruelty only grief can teach. The house was too quiet. The children slept late, exhaustion from the funeral pressing on their young shoulders, while I sat alone at the dining room table, the unopened mail spread before me like accusations. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Thomas's handwriting, those letters that didn't belong to us, and the words that belonged to someone else. My son, my pride. The sun pushed through the blinds in narrow stripes, lighting the dust that hovered in the air. The house looked unchanged, plates stacked neatly, the same flowered curtains, but everything felt altered. The world after a secret never looks the same as the world before it. I pulled the photo albums closer, still lying where I had abandoned them the night before. I flipped through page after page, searching for proof or maybe for denial. Thomas smiling beside Emily on her first day of kindergarten. Thomas lifting Mark high above his shoulders at a baseball game. His smile was always the same, measured, reserved, just shy of laughter. I'd loved that smile, but now it felt rehearsed, as though he had learned to wear it in two separate lives. Halfway through the second album, something slipped from the plastic sleeve. A photograph hidden between pages, folded twice and yellowing at the edges. My breath caught as I opened it. It was Thomas again, younger, hair darker, standing in front of a brick building I didn't recognize. Beside him, a woman with auburn hair, her arm looped through his as if she had always belonged there. And between them, a boy no older than 10, his face unmistakably Whittaker. The jawline, the slope of the nose, my husband's features stamped on a child I had never seen. The back of the photo bore a note in Thomas's handwriting. David's first day at St. Mary's. He looks just like me. The room swayed. I clutched the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. It wasn't just letters now. It wasn't just a will. It was flesh and blood. Proof that Thomas had raised another family in shadows, carving out moments of fatherhood he had denied our own children. I pressed the photo against my chest, not out of love but to keep my hands from tearing it. My mind reeled with questions. Who was the woman? Did she know about us? Had she watched the funeral from the shadows, satisfied that her son would inherit what she could not? Footsteps on the stairs startled me. Emily entered the kitchen, her hair unbrushed, eyes still swollen from sleep. She carried herself with that gentle grace she'd had since she was a child, the kind of softness that made her a favorite among her students. "Mom," she asked quietly, "why are you up so early?" I shoved the photo under the album, but she had already noticed my trembling hands. She sat across from me, folding her arms on the table like she had done countless mornings before. "What's wrong?" I looked at my daughter, her face so much like mine at that age, and I couldn't lie. I slid the photograph toward her. She picked it up slowly, studied it, then glanced back at me with widening eyes. "Who is this?" she whispered. "His name is David," I said, my voice breaking on the name. "Your father's other son." Emily pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But how, all these years?" "I don't know," I admitted, wiping my own eyes. "I don't know how he kept it from us. I don't know how many people already knew, but it's true. I found letters in the attic and a will." Her shoulders trembled. She looked again at the photo, tracing the boy's face with her finger. "He looks like Dad. He looks like Mark." The sound of a door slamming upstairs announced Mark's arrival. He came bounding down the stairs, still in his t-shirt from the night before, hair sticking up in every direction. "What's going on?" he demanded, catching the heaviness in the room. His eyes darted to the photo in Emily's hands. When she passed it to him, he froze. His jaw clenched, his fists tightening. "Who the hell is this?" I took a shaky breath. "He's your half-brother." Mark's face flushed with anger. "Half-brother? Dad's dead 2 days, and now you're telling me he's got some bastard kid out there? This is crap." "Mark," I said softly, reaching for him. He pulled away. "No, Mom, don't defend him. He lied to us. He lied to you. And now you expect me to share everything with some stranger?" His voice cracked, rage tangled with grief. He hurled the photo onto the table, the boy's smile landing face up between us like a challenge. Emily wiped her cheeks. "Maybe we need to know him," she whispered. "If he's Dad's son?" "He's not my brother," Mark snapped. His voice was sharp enough to cut. I closed my eyes. My children, divided in an instant by a truth none of us had asked for. The air between them felt like a chasm. I gathered the photo back into my hands, feeling the weight of the boy's stare. Thomas had written his name so casually, so lovingly, as if he had intended for me to find it one day, or maybe he had hoped I never would. The morning light shifted across the kitchen floor, bright and merciless. My family was already cracking, the first fractures of a secret that had waited too long to be told. And somewhere out there, the boy in the photograph was no longer 10. He was a man now. A man who, by my husband's hand, was destined to step into our lives whether we welcomed him or not. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the funeral casseroles no one had touched. The photograph of David lay between us, its edges curling with age, as if the paper itself had grown weary of keeping secrets. I stood behind my chair, Emily's tears on one side of the table, Mark's anger on the other. For a moment I thought if I let go, if I stepped away, the whole house might crack open like glass. Mark shoved the picture back toward me. "So that's it? Dad sneaks around, has some kid, and now we just accept it? No way." His voice carried the weight of every wound a boy can suffer when his hero fails. "Mark," I began. "No," he cut me off, his fist slamming against the table. The dishes rattled. "He lied to us our whole lives. To you, Mom, to me, to Emily. And you're sitting here like this is something we can work through?" Emily flinched but did not argue. Her hands shook as she wiped her cheeks. "I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying he exists. Pretending he doesn't won't change that." Mark turned on her, his eyes sharp. "Don't you dare defend him, don't you dare." Her face crumpled, but her voice held. "I'm not defending him, I'm defending us. We need to know the truth, Mark. Whether we like it or not, David is part of Dad's story, and now he's part of ours." The silence that followed felt thick enough to drown in. I wanted to reach across the table, to hold both of my children's hands, but they were already drifting away from each other, one pulled toward anger, the other toward compassion. I thought of the will tucked inside the drawer, the cruel paragraph that had named David heir to everything. I hadn't told them that part yet. Not yet. How could I? My children's grief was still raw, and I feared if I spoke the words out loud, it would tear us beyond repair. But secrets breed like mold, and mine was already growing. I sat down, my voice low. "There's more, I found a will." Mark's head snapped up, Emily stiffened. "A will?" she asked carefully. I nodded, my throat tightened as I forced the words out. "Your father left everything to David." The room went still. The refrigerator hummed, a clock ticked on the wall, but all I could hear was the sound of my children's world shattering. Emily covered her mouth. Mark's face turned crimson. "You're joking," he spat. "Please tell me you're joking." "I wish I were," I whispered. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. "So what does that mean? We lose the house, the store, all of it?" "It's complicated," I tried, though the truth was simple and brutal. Mark's eyes blazed. "Complicated? He sold us out, Mom. He replaced us." He stormed toward the back door, flung it open, and disappeared onto the porch, the screen slamming behind him. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Emily reached across the table and gripped my hand. "Mom," she said softly, her voice trembling. "What are we going to do?" I didn't answer. I stared at the photograph of David, the boy's young face frozen in time, and wondered what he looked like now. Was he tall? Did he smile like Thomas? Did he even know we existed? The day blurred. Neighbors dropped by with sympathy cards and leftover pie. I thanked them with a mechanical smile, praying they would leave quickly, terrified that someone else might know more than we did. Their voices floated through the living room, kind but edged with curiosity. By evening, Mark had not returned. When he finally came inside, his face was streaked with tears he refused to acknowledge. He avoided my eyes, retreated to his room, and slammed the door. Emily followed him halfway up the stairs before stopping, knowing he would not let her in. I stood at the foot of those stairs, the weight of motherhood pressing heavier than ever. I had spent years mending scraped knees, soothing nightmares, packing lunches. None of that had prepared me for this. How do you protect your children from betrayal that comes from their own blood? That night, I sat alone in the living room, the will spread out on my lap. I read it again and again until the words blurred. In gratitude for the years we were denied each other, each repetition cut deeper. Thomas had thought of David as the son he had lost. What did that make Mark? What did that make Emily? I pressed the paper to my chest and whispered into the emptiness, "You left us to pick up the pieces, Thomas, and I don't know if I'm strong enough." From upstairs, I heard Emily sobbing quietly into her pillow. From Mark's room came the muffled sound of music turned too loud, his way of drowning out the world. The house was full of noise, yet I had never felt more alone. I looked again at David's photograph, a stranger's face, a familiar jawline, a boy who had stolen my husband's heart, and now threatened to take everything else. But beneath the anger, beneath the betrayal, another thought flickered, a dangerous thought I hated myself for having. What if none of this was his fault? The next morning broke gray and restless, the kind of sky that makes everything look bruised. I brewed coffee no one touched, scrambled eggs no one ate. Mark slammed the door on his way to school, backpack slung like a burden across his shoulders. Emily lingered at the table, her eyes swollen but her voice steady. "I'll stay after work and grade papers at the cafe," she said, as if leaving me alone might protect me. When the house emptied, the silence pressed in. It wasn't the peace of solitude, it was the silence of judgment, of things unsaid. The folder with the will lay hidden in the buffet drawer, but its presence throbbed like a toothache. Every creak of the house reminded me that I lived in a place built on secrets. I thought of Thomas's photograph at the funeral, the way some guests had looked at me not with pity, but with knowing eyes. My neighbors had always been kind, bringing pies, waving from porches, lending sugar, but grief sharpens perception. Now I wondered if those smiles masked something more. By mid-morning, the doorbell rang. Helen Collins, my next-door neighbor for 20 years, stood holding a plate of lemon squares. She was the sort of woman who collected gossip the way others collected stamps. Her kindness was genuine, but so was her curiosity. "Linda," she said softly, pressing the plate into my hands, "you must be exhausted." "Thank you, Helen," I murmured, forcing a smile. She stepped inside without waiting to be asked, eyes sweeping the living room as though grief had rearranged the furniture. We sat, and she folded her hands neatly in her lap. After a moment of silence, she leaned closer. "I don't want to burden you," she began, which meant she absolutely did. But at the funeral, well, there were whispers. People saying Thomas might have had another family. I told them not to spread rumors, but you know how people are. The words hit me like a slap, my throat tightened. "Rumors," I repeated. "Yes, something about a son, a young man in town who, well, looks a bit like him." She lowered her voice. "Linda, is it true?" I stared at the plate of lemon squares between us. Powdered sugar dusted the edges like snow. I wanted to lie to laugh it off, but I was too tired, too broken. "I don't know what's true anymore," I whispered. Helen's eyes softened, but curiosity still flickered there. I'm so sorry, dear. People can be cruel. You must take care of yourself. She patted my knee, left the lemon squares, and slipped out the door. The moment she was gone, I collapsed against the couch, so it had already begun. The story was out, carried on the tongues of neighbors who would smile at me while stirring secrets into their coffee. By afternoon, another visitor arrived, Joe Miller, who ran the bakery down the street. He brought a bag of sweet rolls for Mark and Emily. His words were kind, but his eyes betrayed the same curiosity. Linda, he said gently, you know I respected Thomas. He was a good man in many ways, but people are talking. They say there was a young man at the cemetery, standing at a distance, watching the burial. Looked an awful lot like Thomas. I froze, my pulse quickened. I hadn't seen anyone, but then grief narrows vision. I wouldn't know, I said carefully. Joe shifted awkwardly. I don't mean to upset you, just thought you should know. He pressed the bag into my hands and left. When the door closed, my knees buckled. If the boy had been there, if David himself had watched from the edges, then he wasn't just an abstract name on paper. He was real. He was near. I carried the bag of rolls to the kitchen, but the smell turned my stomach. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sit. I paced the house, hands trembling. The whispers were no longer confined to my kitchen or my children's ears. They were everywhere, spilling from mouths that claimed to mean well. By evening, Emily returned. She set her school bag down, her face pale. Mom, she said quietly, some of the teachers asked me about Dad today, about whether he had another child. I didn't know what to say. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as tightly as I could. You don't have to say anything, I whispered. This isn't your burden, but it was. It was all of ours. Later that night, Mark stormed in, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. They're saying things at school, he spat. That Dad had a bastard, that our family's a joke. My heart ached. I reached for him, but he pulled away. This isn't fair, he shouted. Why should we suffer for his lies? He slammed his bedroom door, the frame rattling. I sank into the armchair, head in my hands. The house was unraveling, not from grief alone, but from shame. Shame that wasn't mine to bear, yet here it was, draped over me like a shroud. Around midnight, the phone rang. I hesitated before answering. The line crackled, and a voice I didn't recognize said only 2 words before the click. He's coming. I stood frozen, the dial tone humming in my ear. The whispers weren't just gossip anymore. They were warnings. And somewhere beyond our doors, David, the boy in the photograph, the man of the will, was no longer content to live in shadows. He was on his way. Rain had begun just after dusk, soft at first, then steady, drumming against the windows like an impatient hand. I moved through the house, switching on lamps, though their glow felt feeble against the shadows that pressed in. Emily sat curled on the couch, a blanket around her shoulders, a book open but unread. Mark paced the kitchen like a caged animal, muttering about transferring schools, about never wanting to hear our last name again. I tried to keep myself busy, washing dishes that were already clean, folding towels that didn't need folding. But beneath every small movement, my chest carried the weight of that phone call. He's coming. 2 words that had lodged inside me like splinters. At 8:15, the knock came. 3 sharp raps against the front door, urgent enough to still every sound in the house. Emily's book slipped from her hands. Mark froze mid-step, his face hardening. My own body stiffened as if bracing for an impact I couldn't see. The knock came again. I swallowed and walked toward the door, each step heavy, as though the floorboards were reluctant to carry me there. My hand trembled on the knob. When I pulled it open, the rain rushed in with the scent of wet earth and asphalt. There he was. A young man stood in the porch light, rain soaking his jacket, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked about 22, maybe 23. His eyes, Thomas's eyes, searched mine with something between fear and resolve. He carried no umbrella, no bag, only himself and the storm clinging to him. "My name is David," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. I think I'm your son's brother." The words hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I could only stare. The resemblance was undeniable. His jawline, the slope of his nose, even the way he shifted his weight on the porch reminded me of Thomas. My throat closed. Behind me, Mark's voice cracked like a whip. "Get out." He stormed toward the door, shoving past me. "You don't belong here." David flinched but didn't retreat. "I didn't come to fight," he said, water dripping from his chin. I needed to see you, to see if you were real." "You think showing up here makes you family?" Mark shouted. "You're nothing, you're a mistake." Emily rushed forward, grabbing Mark's arm. "Stop it. He didn't ask to be born." Mark yanked free. His chest heaved with fury. "Dad betrayed us. And now he thinks this guy gets everything. Our house, our store, our lives." He turned to David. "Take it all, just don't pretend you're one of us." David's face twisted in pain. He stepped closer to the threshold but didn't cross it. His voice broke. "I didn't want this either. I didn't even know about the will until last week. My mom, she gave me the papers after the funeral, said it was time. I didn't even know he'd left me anything." The words sliced through me. "Your mother," I repeated, finally finding my voice. She knew. David nodded. "She told me he visited sometimes. Not often. Letters, money when he could. She said he always looked guilty when he left. I never hated him. I just wondered why I wasn't enough for him to stay." The storm outside roared, but inside, the silence was louder. I stared at this young man, this living echo of my husband, and my heart clenched. Not with love, not yet, but with the recognition of a truth too heavy to deny. Emily's eyes shimmered. "You must be freezing. Come inside." "No," Mark snapped. "He doesn't step foot in this house." I stood in the doorway, torn between the son I had raised and the son my husband had hidden. The ache in my chest was unbearable. Finally, I whispered, "Come in." David hesitated, then crossed the threshold. His shoes left wet prints on the rug. He stood awkwardly in the living room, glancing at the photographs on the wall, birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, all the memories he had never been part of. His gaze lingered on one picture of Thomas holding baby Mark. "I used to imagine moments like that," he said softly. "Him teaching me to ride a bike, clapping when I made a goal. I'd see other dads and wonder why mine never showed up." He swallowed hard. "I guess he was here instead." Mark stormed out, slamming his bedroom door so hard the frame rattled. The sound reverberated through the house like an aftershock. Emily wiped her tears, her voice barely audible. "He just needs time." David's eyes fell on me. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of this. I didn't ask for his money. I just wanted to know the family he never gave me." I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat closed. Instead, I gestured to the couch. "Sit." He lowered himself onto the edge, shoulders hunched, hands clasped. I studied him in the lamplight. He was both familiar and foreign, a reflection of Thomas, but with an innocence my husband had long since lost. In that moment, I understood something painful and undeniable. This young man was not the villain. He was the evidence. Evidence of my husband's choices, evidence of a life lived in shadows, evidence that love and betrayal can grow in the same soil. As thunder rolled above us, I sat across from him, folded my trembling hands, and whispered the only question that mattered. "What do you want from us, David?" He looked at me with eyes so much like Thomas's that it hurt to meet them. "Not money," he said. "Not the house, just the truth. And maybe a chance not to be alone." Dinner that night felt like a performance I had not rehearsed for. The storm still lingered outside, rain tracing the windows in silver streaks. Inside, I set the table with trembling hands, each plate and fork clinking louder than it should. My children sat stiffly, Emily folding and unfolding her napkin, Mark glaring at the empty chair across from him. And then there was David, seated at the far end, his wet jacket now hanging by the door, his posture uncertain, as if at any moment he expected to be asked to leave. I ladled soup into bowls. The smell of chicken and herbs filled the air, though my appetite had long since vanished. Emily, always the peacemaker, tried to break the silence. "So, David," she began softly, "what do you do? Are you in school?" He cleared his throat. "I work at the auto shop downtown. Been there since I was 19. Fixing cars is the only thing I've ever been good at." His eyes flicked to me, then away. "I thought about college, but Mom couldn't afford it, and his voice faltered. "Well, you know," the word he hung in the air like a ghost. "Thomas, my husband, their father, the man who had created both this family and the fracture splitting it apart." Mark scoffed. "Must have been nice, getting letters and money from him while we wondered why he was never home for dinner." His spoon clattered against the bowl, soup splashing. "Don't pretend you had it worse." "Mark," I warned gently. David's jaw tightened. "You think money replaces a father? I used to wait by the window every birthday hoping he'd show up. Sometimes he sent a card, sometimes nothing. Do you know what it's like to grow up knowing your father chose another family over you?" The words cracked something in me. Both of them were wounded, both of them robbed in different ways, and neither could see past their own scars. Emily's eyes filled. "Maybe we were all cheated," she whispered. The clink of silverware was the only sound for a long while. David finally broke it, his voice steadier. "I didn't come here to take anything. Not the house, not the store, not even your memories. I needed to understand who he was, and maybe who I am." Mark shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the floor. "You want to know who he was? He was a liar, a coward, and you're proof of it." He stormed upstairs, his footsteps pounding like drums until the door slammed shut. The house shook with the echo. I pressed a hand to my temple. "I'm sorry," I whispered to David. He shook his head. "Don't be, he's right to hate me. I've hated me too. That broke me." "No," I said firmly, my voice trembling. "You are not to blame for his choices. You didn't ask for this. None of us did." Emily reached across the table, placing her hand over his. He flinched at first, then stilled. "You don't have to be alone," she said quietly. "Not anymore." He looked at her as though the words were foreign, a language he'd never been taught. The rain outside softened. The house seemed to breathe again, though uneasily. I watched David sip his soup, tentative, like someone tasting belonging for the first time. I thought of the will locked away, the cruel legal truth waiting to tear us apart again. But in that moment, with my children's faces in the lamplight, I chose silence. One storm at a time. After dinner, Emily cleared the dishes, her movements careful, deliberate. David stood to help, but I shook my head. "You're a guest." He looked startled. "I've never been called that before, not here, not in this house." "You're here now," I said softly. For the first time, a small smile tugged at his lips. It was faint, fragile, but it was real. Later, as I turned off the kitchen light, I caught him staring at the family photos on the wall again. His gaze lingered on one of Thomas holding Emily as a toddler. He reached out, almost touching the glass, then pulled his hand back as though burned. "Good night, Mrs. Whittaker," he said. "Linda," I corrected gently. "Just Linda." He nodded, eyes glistening. "Good night, Linda." When I climbed the stairs, I paused outside Mark's room. Music blared from within, the kind meant to drown out feelings. I pressed my hand to the door, wishing I could press my heart there too. Across the hall, Emily's light was still on. She sat at her desk, pen moving across paper, her shoulders tense. She looked up, met my eyes, and offered a small, weary smile. In my own room, I sat on the edge of the bed, the will burning in my thoughts. My husband had built a house with walls strong enough to keep secrets, but not strong enough to hold us together. Now the secret sat at my table, eating soup, carrying his eyes. As I turned off the lamp, thunder rolled one last time, far away now, a reminder that storms rarely vanish, they only move farther down the road. And I knew the worst of ours had only just begun. The lawyer arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a gray-haired man named Mr. Peterson who had handled Thomas's business affairs for nearly 2 decades. He wore a navy suit and carried a leather briefcase polished to a shine. When I opened the door, the smell of rain still lingered in the yard, though the skies had finally cleared. "Mrs. Whittaker," he said solemnly, tipping his hat. "I'm sorry we meet under such circumstances, but it's time we settle the estate." I stepped aside to let him in. Emily sat on the sofa, her shoulders rigid. Mark leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. David hovered near the doorway like a guest who wasn't sure he belonged. The room felt smaller than ever, as though the walls themselves braced for impact. We gathered around the dining table. Mr. Peterson laid his briefcase on the wood and clicked it open. He placed a stack of papers before him, smoothing them carefully. His voice carried the weight of formality. "Your husband's last will and testament is clear. All property, accounts, and assets are to be transferred to his son, David Whittaker." He paused, glancing at us with polite detachment. "There are no provisions for anyone else." The words landed like stones. Emily gasped softly. Mark exploded. "Are you kidding me?" he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "Everything. The house, the store, even Mom's car. He leaves it all to him?" He jabbed a finger toward David. David's face flushed. "I didn't ask for this," he said quickly. "I didn't even know until last week." "That doesn't make it any better," Mark snapped. "You show up here and suddenly you're heir to everything our family worked for. Do you realize what that means? We lose our home, we lose our father's business, we lose everything." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Legally speaking, the will is binding. Unless contested in court, the estate will transfer to David." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. "Dad never told us," she whispered. "Not once. How could he?" She broke off, covering her face with her hands. I sat frozen, hands folded tightly in my lap. The words on the page were no longer just ink, they were fire, scorching every corner of our lives. Mark pushed back from the table, pacing. "So what? We're supposed to just roll over and hand him the keys. This is insane." "I don't want the store," David said, his voice cracking. "I don't want your house. I wanted to know him, to know you." Mark spun on him, fury blazing. "You got what you wanted, you've seen us, now leave before you take more." "Mark," I said sharply. My voice surprised even me. He froze, his chest heaving. I turned to Mr. Peterson. "Is there no alternative, no way to divide the estate?" The lawyer shook his head. "I'm afraid not. Your husband was specific. Unless David chooses to renounce the inheritance, it belongs solely to him." The room went silent. All eyes turned to David. He looked stricken, his hands trembling on the table. I don't know what to do," he admitted. "I grew up with nothing. Mom struggled every day to put food on the table, and now this," he gestured helplessly. "It feels like I'm stealing from you, but it's also the first thing he ever gave me." His words twisted inside me. I saw the boy in the photograph again, waiting by a window for a father who never came, and I saw my own children sitting beside me, betrayed by the same man. "Blood doesn't make this fair," Mark growled. "Love does, and he never gave you love, he gave you scraps. Don't stand here acting like you deserve more than we do." David's eyes filled with tears. "I never said I did, but maybe I deserve something, maybe I deserve to matter." The words struck me harder than I expected. For a moment, no one spoke. Finally, Mr. Peterson packed up his papers. "I'll give you time," he said gently, "but the law is clear. The estate will pass as written." He nodded politely, then left, the front door clicking shut behind him. The silence that followed was unbearable. Mark stormed upstairs, his footsteps pounding like war drums. Emily wiped her cheeks, whispering, "Why did he do this to us?" David stood, his face pale. "I'll go," he said. "I shouldn't have come," but something inside me stopped him. "No," I said firmly. "Leaving won't change the will, and it won't change the truth." I met his eyes, so painfully like Thomas's. "The question now isn't what he left us, it's what we do with it." David swallowed hard, nodding slowly. As he slipped out into the night, I sank back into my chair, the weight of motherhood pressing heavier than ever. I had 2 children upstairs, one divided by rage, the other by sorrow. And now, another son, unwanted by some, undeniable to all, stood at the center of our unraveling. The battle wasn't just about money. It was about blood, betrayal, and the fragile threads of love that might yet hold us together. And I wasn't sure which side would win. The cemetery was quiet that night, as if even the earth held its breath. The moon hung low, a pale coin caught in tangled clouds. I had come here alone, the will burning in my purse, my chest aching with a grief that no longer felt clean. Grief was supposed to be about love lost, but mine had soured into betrayal, into questions with no answers. I found him there, David, sitting on the damp grass near the fresh mound where Thomas had been laid to rest. His knees were pulled tight to his chest, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with the weight of a sorrow that belonged to both of us. For a moment, I stood in the shadows, watching. He looked so young, so utterly broken, and my heart twisted despite itself. When he finally noticed me, he scrambled to his feet, wiping at his face. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I didn't mean to trespass. I didn't know where else to go." "You're not trespassing," I said softly. "He was your father, too." The words tasted bitter, but they were true. We stood in silence, the night air heavy around us. Finally, he spoke. "I hated him sometimes, for pretending I didn't exist, for making me feel like a secret he was ashamed of, but I loved him too. I couldn't stop." His voice broke. "And now he's gone, and I'll never know why." I closed my eyes, the ache of recognition sharp. "You're not the only one asking that question." He lowered himself back onto the grass, and after a moment I joined him. The earth was cool beneath us. The grave still bore flowers from the funeral, their petals already wilting. "I read the will again today," I admitted, my voice trembling. "He left everything to you. The house, the store, the savings, all of it. He left me nothing but these children and a broken heart." "I don't want any of it," David whispered. "I don't want to take what belongs to you. I don't want to be the reason your family falls apart." Tears welled in my eyes. "It's not that simple. He made sure of that. He gave you the inheritance, but he left me the burden of explaining it, of holding this family together while it tears at the seams." He buried his face in his hands. "I never asked for any of this. I just wanted to know him, to know why I wasn't enough." I reached out, hesitated, then laid my hand on his shoulder. He stiffened, then slowly relaxed under the weight of it. "You were enough," I whispered. "The failure wasn't yours, it was his. He divided his love, and we're the ones paying for it." He looked at me then, his eyes wet, so much like Thomas's that my chest seized. But where Thomas's gaze had grown guarded over the years, David's was raw, unshielded. "I don't hate you," I said, surprising myself. "I thought I would. When I first saw your picture, I thought I'd despise you forever. But then I realized you're just another victim of his choices, just like us." David's lip trembled. "Do you mean that?" "I do." My voice broke. "I can't promise I'll know how to accept you, but I can promise I won't blame you for his sins." The silence between us softened. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of earth and rain. For the first time since the funeral, my heart loosened, not healed, not whole, but no longer clenched like a fist. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "I don't want his money, Linda. I want something real, a family, even if it's just a piece of one." I swallowed hard. Family isn't given in wills or papers. It's chosen every day. Maybe we can choose each other. Slowly, carefully, for Emily, for Mark, for you. He nodded, tears glistening in the moonlight, for all of us. We sat there a long time, 2 broken souls on damp grass, bound by the same man's love and lies. The grave before us was both a wound and a bridge. And in that fragile moment, I understood something I had resisted since the day I opened the attic door. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing him. It was about freeing ourselves. When I finally rose, David stood too. We walked back toward the gate together, the night air cool on our faces. For the first time, I didn't see him as an intruder. I saw him as a boy who had been waiting his whole life for someone to tell him he belonged. At the cemetery gate, I turned to him. "Come to dinner tomorrow," I said. "No promises, no conditions, just come." His eyes widened. Then, slowly, he nodded. As I drove home, the lights of the town flickering in the distance, I realized forgiveness is never one decision. It is 100 choices made again and again, in whispers and in tears. And maybe, just maybe, we had made the first one. The next evening, the house smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, the kind of meal I used to make when Thomas was alive, back when dinner felt like an anchor instead of a battlefield. I set the table with my best china, not because of the food, but because tonight meant something more. It was a step toward healing. David arrived just before 7. He wore a clean shirt, tucked in too carefully, as if he wanted to prove he belonged. Emily greeted him with a small smile, while Mark lingered near the window, arms crossed, silent but present. That was enough for now. We sat together, 4 people joined not by choice but by the messy truth of blood. At first, the air was stiff. Forks scraped plates. Small talk hovered in half sentences. Then David cleared his throat. "I met with Mr. Peterson today," he said. His eyes moved from Emily to Mark to me. "I told him I don't want it all. The house, the store, the savings, they aren't mine alone, they are ours, and I want to divide it that way." Mark lifted his head, startled. "You'd give it back?" David nodded. "It was never about the money, I just wanted to stop feeling like a ghost. I don't want to take your home, I want to be welcome in it." The silence stretched, then softened. Emily reached for his hand. Mark hesitated, but his voice lost its edge. "You're not Dad," he said quietly. "You don't have to pay for what he did." Something in David's shoulders loosened. For the first time, his smile wasn't tentative. It was real. We ate together then, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as a family in the fragile process of remaking itself. Mark even cracked a joke about Emily's overcooked carrots. Emily laughed, David joined, and for a moment the sound of their voices mingling felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. After dinner, we lingered in the living room. Emily showed David old photo albums, pointing out childhood stories, letting him glimpse the pieces of a father he had barely known. Mark watched from the corner, less guarded now, as if weighing whether to let forgiveness slip in. I sat back, my heart swelling with something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Not perfect peace, there were still cracks, still wounds, but enough to remind me that love was stronger than betrayal. Later, when David rose to leave, he paused at the door. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving me a chance." "You gave us one too," I replied. After he was gone, the house felt different. Not lighter exactly, but steadier, like a ship finally finding its balance after a storm. I went upstairs, sat at my desk, and opened my journal. My hand shook as I wrote the words I wanted my children, and perhaps one day David, to remember. Love makes a home. Blood can divide or connect, but only love chooses to stay. I closed the book, blew out the lamp, and whispered into the quiet, "We will be okay." Dear friends, thank you for listening to this story on family revenge secrets. If it touched you, if it reminded you of the fragile strength of family, I invite you to subscribe, to share, and to carry its lesson with you. May your own home be filled not with secrets, but with love. May forgiveness soften your days. And may health, peace, and happiness dwell with you and your family always.